I have quite a few horror stories from when I was a front desk attendant for a hotel, but most of them take place when I work the overnights for the same location. I have a lot of experiences with genuinely creepy and weird people, but I think it would be more fun to share one of the experiences that was a bit more unexplainable and less just this was one creepy guy. So, as I mentioned, I worked as the overnight front desk attendant for this hotel for a couple of years actually. The schedule kind of sucked, and I had to really work to adjust my sleep schedule, and it made days off incredibly difficult. But the pay was decent for the time, and I didn't have much going for me in my life beyond working there. The nights typically consisted of sitting at the front desk for hours, dealing with the one or two people that would show up in the middle of the night because they spent too much time on the road, and sometimes taking things up to rooms if there was an issue or emergency. Beyond that, I would sit at the desk and pretty much just file out the paperwork that had to be done each night. This story I want to share happened during my first year there. I don't recall the time of year, but I think it was in the early winter. The whole thing started when I got a call from the third floor of the building. It was a guest that had checked in at the beginning of my shift, and when I checked him in, he seemed like a pretty decent person. He seemed sane, stable, and polite enough, and I know it sounds weird that I'm saying this, but I'm saying this to demonstrate that he probably wasn't crazy. Anyways, he called down and asked if I could come help him, and he asked me if there was anything I could do about the temperature of the room. I mentioned there was a thermostat in the room, and that most of them were set to a pretty standard temperature, something like 73. He then said that it was set to 73, but the room was feeling cold by the door, like there was a draft coming in from the hallway. That was kind of weird since his room was literally in the middle of the hallway, so he was nowhere near any draft-causing spots like windows or exits. I told him I would come up and check it out shortly. After I hung up the phone, I went ahead and placed the "Be Right Back" sign on the desk and went up to the third floor to see what was going on. When I got up there, I was a bit annoyed. The floor was a pretty standard temperature, but then I walked towards his room and noticed that this guy wasn't lying. As soon as I approached his door, it felt like the hallway went from this nice ambient temperature to about 20 degrees or so colder. We weren't booked full. There was only one other guest staying in a room near him, and their door didn't feel cold, so they didn't have the AC on or anything. But for some reason, the closer I got to his door, the colder it felt. I knocked on his door to let him know that I at least felt what he was talking about. When he answered, I told him that he was definitely correct. It was colder, but that I couldn't figure out what it was as there weren't any drafts, and there was nothing that should have been causing the colder temps. I then asked him if he wanted to move to another room, and after a bit of contemplating, he said that he would. We went through the whole process. I got him in another room down the hall, closer to the elevator, and apologized for the inconvenience. He seemed satisfied with my resolution, so we moved on, and I thought that was the end of it. Except about 20 minutes later, he called down to the front desk again. This time, he was a lot less happy. He started going off about how someone had knocked on his door multiple times, but then when he went to answer it, there was no one there. This was a really weird thing to have happening, mostly because, like I mentioned, there was only one other person near him, and that person was an older gentleman that looked like he was there for business, not the type to knock and run. I pulled up the camera system to check if I could see his door, and sure enough, I could. I asked him when the last time it happened was, and he started telling me that it started happening almost right away as soon as he got settled into his new room, and that had been happening every few minutes. He said that each time it happened, there would be no one on the other side of the door, so he assumed that they were knocking and running away. He then said that he had walked around the hallways and not seen anyone. As soon as he finished explaining this, I heard, clear as day, 3 very aggressive knocks on the door of his room come through the phone. He then got up and angrily said, "See, there's that SOB again." The problem was that I was staring at his door from the camera. There was no one there. I even kind of said that under my breath, and at first I don't think he understood what I said, because he said, "Right, because they knock and run away." I then reiterated my statement saying, "No, sir, I'm looking at your door from the camera, and there is no one there. As in, no one came to your door and knocked at all." He paused for a moment, but came back with a much less angry, much more confused tone, saying, "But you heard the knocking, right?" I told him that I did hear it, but said that at no point in time did anyone come to his door. Pretty much right away, we heard another very loud knock on the door, and he started saying, "Is there anyone there now?" To which I said no. I could tell that he was starting to freak out, and to be honest, I was as well. Between the weird drop in temperature around his old room, and now the phantom knocking, it seemed like some sort of spirit or ghost was following and messing with this guy. I know it was just 2 isolated incidents, but they were bizarre and were not things that we'd ever had reported. The knocking was definitely more terrifying than the cold spot, but both kind of had me leaning into supernatural territory. After a few seconds of silence, I offered to move him to one of the expensive rooms on another floor, basically upgrading him for free because of this. He did agree, and when he came down to the front desk, he was pretty pale and obviously freaking out. I asked if he was okay or if something else happened, and he told me that as he left his room with his stuff, he started hearing something laughing. I kind of passed over his comment and told him that we would get him taken care of. I got him in one of our most expensive rooms, which was not on the 3rd floor, and told him that if there were any more issues, I would go ahead with a full refund. He nodded and just slowly stepped back to the elevator with 0 energy in his step. A few things to wrap the story up. First thing first, he did not have any more issues. When he checked out in the morning, I was told that he wanted to give praise to my manager for my handling of his issues, basically saying that I went above and beyond for him. And to anyone that will say that he was faking the issues or doing something to cause them, I'm going to say that I highly doubt it. The cold spot issue, I guess he could have had the AC on in the room, but that would be kind of dumb to do if I was coming up to see why it was so cold. Plus, it felt like it was more in the hallway than coming from his room. The knocking thing, I'm certain wasn't his doing. After I got him in the 3rd room, I actually went back and watched the camera footage, and unless he was so committed to the bit that he opened his door and looked around confused each time, and then left to walk around the hallway, and then angrily threw the door open for the act, all without knowing I could see him on camera, then I'm pretty certain it was real. On top of that, after he left his room, I saw him start to walk down the hallway and then pause to look back and around for what I'm assuming was the laughing. I watched the color drain from his face on that footage, and there's no real way to fake fear that intense. Also, this was the only complaint that I ever received about all this, which makes me seriously think that whatever this was directly attached to him. In the end, it was a super weird and genuinely creepy situation, and I felt bad for the guy. By the time he got into the new room, it was already past midnight, and I'm concerned he didn't sleep very well. I hope that this thing wasn't attached and was just messing with him for some reason, and I hope that he made it wherever he was going safely. And I'm also very sorry that your stay at our hotel was so eventful. I used to work for a small electronics repair and sales shop that was directly connected to a small coffee shop. By directly connected, I mean that it was pretty much one business. There was just a wall with a cutout door frame separating us, and they were owned by the same couple. The idea was that we could potentially offer our repair services to the people that like to sit at the coffee shop or sell them new devices like chargers, mice, and such. For the most part, I don't really think the businesses had a lot of crossover when it came to clientele, with the exception of cables and chargers. We were located fairly close to a hotel, and we were a decent work spot for people that wanted to do work at a coffee shop that wasn't Starbucks. We had high-speed Wi-Fi, at least for the time, and back then there weren't many places that offered free Wi-Fi around. As mentioned, one of the services that we offered was device repair. This included computers and cell phones, and we were pretty good at getting things fixed and back to the clients within a day or two at most. The time I worked there, I fixed a number of systems, and while it was always mildly humorous to see things that were adult in nature on a system that was given to us by a little old lady, I never judged anyone based on what they did on their systems. A lot of people look at adult content, even those in their 70s, so I would just chuckle to myself and continue on with the repair. However, there was a policy both within the company and personally that if we ever found illegal content on a system, we had to report it. I don't want to say what content specifically, but I'm sure you can guess what I mean. Thankfully, that never came up, and we never had to contact the police about anything we found. One day, when I was working, a guy came into the store and asked me if I knew how to fix computers that were locked. I wasn't really sure what he meant, so I asked if he was just locked out of the system or if something else was going on. He then placed a laptop on the counter, opened it, and showed me what he meant. His system was actually locked out by a crypto locker. For those that don't know what a crypto locker malware is, it's basically a virus that locks you out of your system and files and tells you that in order to get your files, you have to pay them X amount of Bitcoin, and they'll give you the key to unlock it. They are pretty aggressive computer viruses, but depending on which one you got hit with, you can get around some of them if you know what you're doing, assuming it hasn't completely encrypted your stuff. I told him that it was a possibility, but it was going to take more than a few hours, and quoted a 2-day repair time. We usually didn't quote days, but we also didn't usually get crypto locker cases. The guy seemed to think about it for a few moments, glancing at me and then back at the laptop, tapping his foot quickly while mulling it over. He then asked me how much it would cost, and I gave him the standard quote, but then mentioned that depending on how bad it was, it could be a bit more. He nodded and then agreed to leave it with us. I wrote up the paperwork, he quickly signed the quote and page, and then thanked me for my help. I said of course, and told him that I would call him if we were able to get anywhere with the recovery. The day went on as normal, and after a few hours, I decided that I would take a look at this laptop while I had some free time. I got it booted up and connected to what I needed to connect it to, and started attempting the recovery. To my surprise, this was a very basic malware, and it hadn't really done anything to his files. It was more of a permanent overlay that was just blocking the screen. It basically just looked like I could go ahead and copy his files over and just do a clean Windows installation, and that would be it. When I got to that point, I went ahead and called the guy that left it at the store. The conversation went like this. Hello? Hey, this is my name from the store. You left your laptop here earlier today for repair. I wanted to let you know that I was able to get into the files, and we should be able to actually get this done today. Would you be able to pick it up tomorrow? You got into my files? His voice changed a bit, sounding a bit more concerned. I was able to get to them, yeah. I have them copying over to an external drive right now, and then I'll do a clean install of Windows, and you should be good to go. He then went silent for a few moments, like he was thinking of what to say to me, and then hit me with, "What did you see?" I paused, a bit confused. You mean like with the virus? No, in my files. What did you see in my files? This question was one that I was dreading. If he was asking me what I saw, then it was likely that he was hiding something illegal. I mentioned that I hadn't seen anything really, that I was just copying them over to a drive, but then mentioned that I would have to scan them to make sure we got rid of the malware. He then asked, "What's your policy for if you find illegal content in my files?" It was at that point that any uncertainty was removed from my mind. I mentioned that it was policy to report illegal content to the police. As soon as I said that, he hung up the phone without saying anything, leaving me just sitting there staring at the laptop as it was backing up. I wasn't really sure what to do because I hadn't actually seen any illegal content, but the way he acted on that call told me that if I clicked through the system, I most likely would. Part of me was holding on to the slight bit of hope that maybe it was just some pirated music or a cracked version of The Sims or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. At this point, I decided to go ahead and just leave the computer backing up and opted to deal with it in the morning as it was getting pretty late. Odds are I was going to have to report this all to the police in the morning, and I really didn't want to have to deal with that right then. I know that may sound dumb, but the computer wasn't going anywhere. It was going to be locked down in the back, and I would leave a note on the system that said, "Do not touch." Plus, the files were all going through the backup and scan, and it was going to take a couple of hours anyways. I locked up the store, did the closing tasks, and went home for the night. I even made sure that this guy wasn't standing outside the store waiting for me to leave or something, but there wasn't anyone there. I assumed that this was going to be the end of it until the morning, and it kind of was. But imagine my surprise when I showed up to open the store the next morning, and the store was nothing more than a blackened and burned out husk. When I got there, I saw the owner and asked what the hell had happened. He then tells me that at some point in the early morning, someone had apparently come to the store, broken in through the cafe's back door, and burned it all. At that point, I knew what this was. The guy had actually broken in, and not only that, he went full nuclear on the store. I mentioned the situation to the owner, and he told me that he would need to give a statement to the police. I agreed and said that I would. To wrap this up, the obvious, the guy burned down the store. There was camera footage of him breaking into the store, and while he did wear a mask, the police were able to at least get a vague idea of what he looked like. I told the police that he had left his computer in the store and mentioned that when I called him, he seemed really anxious about what we would do if we found illegal files. I think they saw where this was going, and they asked if I knew a name. I remember that his first name was Brian, but I could not remember his last name. Beyond, it was an uncommon name. Something that was similar to Stromboli or something like that. They took the information that I could give and said that they would look into it, but then mentioned that if I could remember anything, to please call them. After they left, my boss and I went into the building to see if anything at all could be salvaged. We went to the repair room and everything was completely destroyed. I saw what looked like a laptop, but it was completely melted and destroyed. I put it off to the side though, just in case they could get data from it somehow. I know data forensic analysts can do some crazy things. Unfortunately, the dock with the drive that it was backing up to was completely destroyed as well. After rummaging around a bit more, it clicked in my head that he had signed the quote when he dropped off the system, and that I put all the quotes with the cash in the safe in the back. The owner popped it open, and sure enough, everything was sitting there, none the worse for wear. We ended up calling the police back out and gave them the work order he signed, as well as the 2 very heavily damaged hard drives. At this point, the whole case was out of our hands. The police had the information and the drives, and if they could pull anything from them, they would. Unfortunately, I have no idea if this guy ever got caught or arrested. The owner didn't reopen the store after this either, so obviously I didn't work there after that. The building got rebuilt and turned into a Jimmy John's, which, great, but I kind of miss working there and doing the repairs. Either way, that's my creepy story of when I worked at that store, and all I can do is hope that the police did get that guy, because God only knows what was on that hard drive. I have a really weird story from way back when I was a very young lad. I think at the time I would have been around 12 or 13 at the very oldest. Back when I lived in my parents' old house, which was pretty much in the middle of nowhere in the northern Midwest. I don't want to give the exact location because I really don't know what this whole thing was about, and if it was more serious than I think, I don't want to, anger someone or something. I know that sounds stupid, but to me, it makes sense, especially with what I saw and how it ended up. Back then, I used to spend a lot of time hiking out in the woods behind my neighborhood. There weren't any other kids in my area, and my only sibling was my older sister, so my childhood was honestly pretty boring and void of friendship. I made the best of it though, and I used to make up a lot of fun games with myself. Not that I remember what I used to do, I just used to play some dumb games until I had to go home for dinner. This event actually took place in those woods. It was sometime in the middle of summer because I was out of school and was home alone for most of the day because my sister was always at her girlfriend's house, so I just pretty much did whatever I wanted to do. On this day, I was doing as I always did and went out into the woods to see what I could get up to. I was out playing, doing a whole lot of nothing, when I noticed something out a bit into the forest. It looked like a person standing in the woods, and they were of an adult's height and stature, but they were just standing there, completely and totally still. I was a bit nervous at first. I hadn't seen anyone in these woods in the years that I've lived there. Most of the people didn't spend any time back here. It was really strange to see this person standing in the woods, and even weirder that they were wearing all black from top to bottom. It looked like they were wearing a ski mask too, since the back of their head was covered in some kind of black cloth as well. Again, this was the middle of summer. It was kind of hot outside, so the fact that they were wearing all black and what appeared to be a ski mask was even weirder. I started kind of creeping around to see what exactly this person was looking at because, like I mentioned, he was just standing there completely stone still. At first, I was kind of sneaking around, but again, he wasn't paying any attention to me, so after a bit, I stopped sneaking and just kind of started walking around him from a safe distance. Honestly, I wasn't 100% sure that he was actually a person and not a mannequin that was placed there, because he didn't react to me walking around into what would have been his line of sight. As I got around to the front, I noticed two things that made this whole thing even weirder. First off, he wasn't staring at anything. There was nothing in front of him. He was just standing there and looking down at the ground. Secondly, he was wearing a plain white mask with no details. It was a mask that was shaped like a face, but it was just plain white with no other details. So, to reiterate that, this person was standing completely still, wearing all black, including some kind of head cover, and was wearing a white mask with no detail, and he was staring at literally nothing. After just standing there for a few moments, I decided that this was actually terrifying, and I took off to go back home. Again, I kept my distance, but he continued to not pay any attention nor acknowledge that I was anywhere nearby. There was a point where I did get close enough to see that this man was breathing and that this was a person, not a mannequin. I went home and I wasn't really sure what I should do, or if I should really do anything, because he wasn't hurting anyone or doing anything illegal or anything like that. I told my mom when she got home that there was a man in the woods, and she told me that it was public and that there wasn't anything wrong with that. I kind of just accepted that response and moved on. It doesn't quite end there though. There is actually a little more to the story. A couple of days after that happened, I had actually gone back out into the woods because I wanted to see if the man was still there. No idea why I thought he would be there still, or again, as it was a few days later. I guess I just thought if he was there, then whatever he was doing would be considered sketchy and I could possibly get my parents out there to see what was happening. Of course, he wasn't there, but when I went out to where he was standing, I did find something that I didn't expect. Right where the man was standing was a small wooden cross stabbed into the ground, and the white mask was nailed to where the two parts of the wood crossed over. There was nothing written on the cross. There was nothing else there, just the cross with the mask. Back then, it was just weird to me, and I had no idea what to think. But now, part of me thinks it had something to do with a cult or something, because it was odd behavior, and the whole cross thing was just bizarre. That's actually why I didn't want to mention the location, because if it was a cult thing, I don't want them coming to find me, because I still live in that town. Before anyone asks, no, I never went back to that area of the woods. No, I never did tell anyone else about the cross. And no, I have no idea if it's still there. So, to me, this was the scariest thing I have ever experienced, and I hope that I never experience anything like it again. I moved into this tiny little rental about 6 years ago. It was a 2-bedroom duplex and was quite the steal in my opinion. The rent was cheap, the place was in good condition, and even the property managers seemed pretty nice. I got all unpacked and was feeling good with my choice of home. It wasn't till about 6 months in or so that I started experiencing things. It started as things just disappearing, like my keys, jewelry, glasses, little things like that. But then they would end up in other places that I would never leave them. I had a dish in the bathroom that I put my rings in, or on the windowsill in the kitchen, if I took them off in there. Otherwise, they were on me or in my jewelry box. My keys hung on the rack next to my door, or they were in my purse, and I always had my glasses on unless I showered or went to bed. Then they were in their case in my bedroom. There were a few times I found my rings sitting evenly spread out on the kitchen table. If I were to have left them on the table, why would I leave them spread out like that? I found my keys in the bathroom and under my couch, and even my glasses were found neatly folded and balancing on a pillow on the couch. That was after I went to bed. Again, I wouldn't take them off in the living room and walk to the bedroom. I am open-minded to the paranormal, and so I thought maybe someone was upset that I was here, or maybe they were just lonely and happy to have company since the house had been vacant for a few years. It was a house that had been abandoned and was redone and turned into a duplex. I wasn't told about any deaths that happened there, but to be honest, I was still young. I don't know if that is a law across the US, that deaths have to be disclosed to new tenants, or if it's only if you buy the place versus renting like what I was doing. So I tried to just talk to them, if anything was there. I told them I wanted to share the home with them and thank them for coexisting, trying to be as generous and friendly to them as I could be. I mean, they had been harmless so far. Yet, things got worse. The events I witnessed started becoming more emotionally fueled. My windows opened upward, and they never had trouble staying open before, but they would slam shut. Same with the doors, where they never swung open or closed on their own, would now suddenly move. It seemed to particularly like my bedroom door to remain open, because every time I closed it, it would come open. I've had a few cups and plates fly off the counter as well. These are the things that I tried to ignore and not feed into it or show any fear, but still try to be reasonable. I guess as reasonable as you can be with a spirit, right? But the one thing I couldn't shake were the dreams. I never seemed to remember them when I woke up, but I do remember waking with my heart racing, breathing heavily, and feeling scared. But I never knew why. I would go check to make sure all the doors and windows were locked and try to go back to bed. And no matter what I wore to bed, I was always freezing when I woke up. It was such a strange feeling. So I know this was probably stupid doing alone, but I didn't really have anyone around to do this with. My boyfriend was at work, friends were busy with life, and I didn't want to bother them with something like this anyways. But I held a seance by myself, hoping to better understand the spirits I was feeling, or at least calm them. Unfortunately, all I got was this feeling like someone was watching me and was disappointed. Not really angry, just upset, I guess. So I finished up, watched the movie, and then went to bed. That's when things got pretty strange for me. It felt like a dream at first, that I was watching play out in front of me. But then I realized I was in this dream. It was my very own bedroom. I was standing against the wall, facing the foot of my bed. It was dark, except for the glow from the moon and the streetlight coming in from my window. But the problem with this was that there was someone in my bed. That person was also me. I was wearing the same thing I went to bed in, which was a tank top and my fuzzy Rugrats pants. My hair was in one single braid, just as I did the night before, and as I stood there, looking down at myself sleeping, I then saw a large, dark looming figure standing next to my bed, close enough to touch me. We both stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching myself sleep, watching my chest rise and fall, making sure I wasn't struggling to breathe or something. Then my attention turned to the thing standing over me. I was trying to make something out of it, a person I recognized or even didn't, hoping to make sense of what I was seeing. But then I could see the shape of the head slowly turning to look towards me, and in that moment, I felt the most overwhelming sense of dread I had ever felt in my life. At that moment, I just wanted to cry and scream, but I couldn't move a muscle. I watched on, terrified for myself and what was about to happen to me. Right then, I saw what I assumed to be the figure's arms wrap around me, then its legs, until it seemed to engulf me in darkness. Something finally broke free, and I was able to overcome the paralysis as I ran to my side, barely able to see myself at this point. Without thinking, I reached down and grabbed my shoulder. At that moment, I remember waking up after feeling something touch my shoulder. I felt myself touch my own shoulder. I reached up and turned on my headrest light and looked around my room. No one else was in there. It was just me. And again, I was freezing. I was terrified at this point and just started crying. I think I probably turned on every light in that place and sat curled up on my couch in the living room with the TV on, some kind of cartoon. My boyfriend worked overnights at that point, so I called him freaking out and explaining what just happened. He wasn't one to dismiss my thoughts and beliefs, but I think he was just trying to do whatever he could to calm me down, and said something about it probably being some kind of sleep paralysis or lucid dream, since it seemed so real. But I'm not convinced it was a dream. I remember standing on the cold hardwood floor. I remember feeling the ridges in the wall against my back. I remember listening to my shallow, shaky breaths. And I remember the feeling of my hand on my own shoulder and the sense that someone was shaking me awake. My boyfriend was going to be going on his lunch break, and I wasn't going to be sleeping anytime soon, so I decided to bring him something to eat to get my mind off of it. When I got there, we talked about it a little bit more, and I guess I must have looked pretty convincing because I remember the concerned look on his face and offering to stay over with me. He lived with friends, so it was a lot less awkward to stay at my place than his. I stayed there for a few hours till I went out to my car and fell asleep. He ended up getting out an hour early, and he followed me back to my place. We slept on my couch that night, however, as I didn't want to even go into my bedroom. I decided to sage the whole place the next day, and I had trouble sleeping there alone from then on, as I always felt a strong presence, like someone was there with me. I was fine during the day, but I struggled at night. My boyfriend was planning on moving in with me after he finished working overnights, but we expedited that process because I just couldn't do it anymore. I felt pathetic not wanting to be alone in my own home. I didn't renew my lease after that year. The rent was great and the place was gorgeous and in a fantastic area, but it wasn't good for my health. I still have no explanation for that night because I have never heard of an experience where you can see and feel yourself. If anyone has any experiences similar, I'd love to hear about it because I've never found an answer, but at least I never experienced that again. So that, my friends, was another collection of true creepy stories. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. I'd love to see new faces. And if you're already subscribed, welcome back. Happy to see you again. I like your shirt. I'd also love to get to know you all more. So let me know in the comments below, what's your favorite season? Any particular reason why? I know spring is coming up soon, and while winter is my favorite, I'm looking forward to spring. Ready to see some of the birds and the flowers that we get in the area. And not to mention the spring thunderstorms. Those are the best. But with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. And until next time, take care.